Okay, folks, buckle up because we're about to go deep into some history that is still making waves today. You know, we're talking about Indian nationalism back in the days of the British Raj.
Mm.
So, how did India go from being under Britain's thumb to demanding freedom?
It's a wild story.
Yeah, and to help us unpack all this, we've got a great source and educational excerpt called Nationalism in India, Class
Yeah.
10. I mean, it's meant for students, but it's got some real gems in there.
Absolutely. It's fascinating how many things the British did, thinking they were tightening their grip on India, but actually ended up fueling the very movement they were trying to squash.
Right. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's set the stage here. Picture
Hmm.
India under British rule. We're talking major economic exploitation, political suppression. Basically, you're living in a system that's rigged to benefit someone else, not you.
Right, and a perfect example of that is the zamindari system, The British basically gave local landlords all this power to collect taxes from Indian farmers.
So basically, middlemen.
Yeah, middlemen squeezing every rupee they could, and guess where all that money went? Straight back to Britain. Not exactly a recipe for happy citizens.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah.
So how does a whole nation go from feeling resentful and exploited to actually organizing a full-blown movement for independence? How do you go from grumbling to action?
Well, you got to think about the unintended consequences. The British were so focused on controlling India. They built all this infrastructure, a unified administration, even a whole education system, all to make ruling easier. But these tools they created ended up connecting Indians in a way they hadn't been before.
Ironic, isn't it? Like they built a platform for their own overthrow.
It really is.
But I'm curious about the education part specifically. How did that fan the flames of nationalism?
Yeah, it's almost funny, They wanted to create these loyal little subjects, but by exposing Indian intellectuals to all these Western ideals like liberty and democracy through their education system, they basically handed them the blueprint for demanding their own rights.
It's like giving someone a cookbook and then being surprised when they whip up a revolution. Yeah.
And speaking of things backfiring spectacularly, let's talk about the partition of Bengal in 1905.
Oh, yeah, that was huge. A major turning point.
Yeah.
Imagine someone coming in and trying to break up your family just to maintain control. That's how a lot of Indians felt about this partition,
It was felt so personal.
Oh, absolutely. It was supposed to be this administrative move, make things more efficient or whatever, but it was seen as a blatant attempt to divide and conquer, divide and rule, like they say. And that just poured fuel on the fire. It really sparked protests all across the country.
Wow. So this is where we start to see some of those legendary figures emerge, right? Gandhi with his philosophy of nonviolent resistance and Nehru with his more socialist vision for an independent India.
Exactly. And these leaders, they're so different in their approaches, But that just shows you how complex this movement really was. Gandhi, with his focus on mass mobilization, peaceful protests, he was able to bring people together from all walks of life.
He really had this power to unite people, didn't he? He did. And Nehru, on the other hand, he brought this more modern intellectual perspective,
Yeah.
He was pushing for industrialization. Social reform really wanted to modernize India.
So two very different paths to the same goal.
Right.
It's amazing how nationalism in India,
Yeah.
Class 10, manages to capture all these nuances.
Right.
It's not just like here are the dates and the names. It's giving students a real feel for this pivotal moment in their history.
For sure. It helps them understand that India's independence wasn't this simple, straightforward thing. It was this complex tapestry, woven from all these different ideologies, strategies, and sacrifices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've seen how this resentment, these unintended consequences, and these charismatic leaders all came together to create this unstoppable force for change in India.
Yeah.
But I think there's a bigger question here.
Uh-huh.
How did the specific conditions in India at that time, the economic hardships, the social structures, how did those things actually shape the strategies of the independence movement?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Understanding those connections helps you understand not just what happened, but why those specific tactics were effective in the Indian context,
Yeah, it makes you think about how context is everything.
It really is.
So much to ponder, right? As you think about all this, consider how deeply the legacy of British colonialism is still intertwined with modern India. It's influencing its politics, its economy, its place in the world. And that's something that we can all learn from no matter where we are in the world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure.
It was great having